So, welcome everyone to the October 16th OSPO Working Group meeting. As always, we are under the CHAOSS Code of Conduct, so please keep that in mind and be kind. Before we started the recording, we talked about this and decided to go ahead and record this meeting. We have a couple of things on the agenda, but we also have loads of space. So if there's something else you want to discuss, please go ahead and replace with your agenda item if there's something you want to chat about, because we should have plenty of time. Okay, so the first item on the agenda, October 30th. So I personally will be at the Digital Resilience Forum that Viterti is hosting in Madrid, so I will not be here. So the question is, should we cancel, or would someone else like to run the meeting and hold the meeting? I know this also conflicts with some Linux Foundation events in Ghent, I think, on the 28th, 29th, 30th-ish. So I don't know if people are going to be around, but does someone want to volunteer to run it? Or should we cancel it?
I never complain about having fewer meetings.
No, I'm not one to oppose fewer meetings either.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a big fan of canceling occasionally when you aren't going to have people or there's nothing to talk about. Okay, so I'll talk to Elizabeth, I'll get it removed from the calendar, and I'll send a note out to the Slack channel. Okay, so this topic came up. I was chatting with someone who runs an OSPO, and his folks couldn't be here, and I don't want to out who it is since we're recording. But one of the things that they're looking at, and also if anybody wants to help take notes, that would be fantastic, because I have a hard time talking and taking notes at the same time. So, but one of the things that they're looking at as they start to measure viability of projects, one of the things that they're considering is how do they measure the complexity of a project, and how, because and thinking about how that impacts viability and risk, right? So if a project is super complex, it might not be something that they could, maybe just fork and maintain, or maybe replace with something else. So they're interested in thinking about complexity as it relates to, so project complexity, as it relates to viability and risk. So what I'm curious is, has anybody else on this call, any other OSPOs, thought about how you, so it's two questions, like how would you measure complexity? Because there are lots of different ways to measure it, so I'm interested in people's ideas. And whether or not you think about this when you're thinking about viability and risk.
I'll tell you, one area where I think about it a lot is in the context of container images, because of all the layers. I think that adds a lot of complexity to open source compliance for sure, and potentially even cybersecurity complexity, because while some of those items in the layers might be masked or unused or overridden, they still have the potential to provide an in for someone who's got mad skills. And I'm a big fan of trying to squash or harden those containers down to what's actually part of that running image, not every layer that has been added on since the dawn of time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, container complexity is a huge issue. I remember when I was at VMware, we started building some tooling that we eventually open sourced into the Linux Foundation called Turn, that was around sorry, it was around being able to inspect container images and really understand what's in there. Because like you said, it is an attack vector, and people who are pretty savvy, there's lots of container images that contain all kinds of things that you may not even realize it, frankly.
There's a vendor we've been looking at called RapidFort that squashes the container images. It'd be great if there was an open source tool that lets you squash those container images, but I haven't found one yet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
I've not considered container complexity as a thing that you would measure that way, but clearly that's a factor. And I think it's also the most easily penetrated piece of infrastructure. So yes, I hadn't thought about that, but I think that's important. In terms of code complexity, Augur for a long time has been doing Kokomo and enables people to look at complexity of the code itself with Kokomo, which is a long accepted sort of standard with some known limitations around things like JavaScript, where I'm not even sure it's wrong about the complexity assigned to JavaScript, which is very high. Like sometimes I'm shocked by it, but sometimes I deal with JavaScript and I'm like, well, maybe that's right.
Is it measuring code complexity? I am familiar with Kokomo. I've seen some presentations on it, but I thought it mostly looked at lines of code.
It does count, so counting the lines of code is one of the things it does. It also counts the number of sort of trying to think of the words like the control structure. So like your for loops, your while loops, your if statement. So it's looking for execution complexity as well.
Okay. I didn't realize it had that in there as part of its
Well,
complexity measure. I
I,
thought it was more of a lines of code rough measure.
yeah, I think it is rough for sure. And I think it depends on what you're using to get your Kokomo measurement. So there are a few tools out there. We use Boiter SCC, which is a simple code counter written in Go.
Remy likes that.
Yeah.
You got a heart for that, Sean.
Yeah, I know. It's like I'm loving it. I put the person and the repo name in the chat just now. It's ridiculously easy to run it. And we run it in Augur to keep track of how it changes over time.
Remy also put one in the chat, and I think he's spot on that one. That is definitely an area of complexity.
Yeah, for sure. And we have separate metrics for that.
Yeah, we steal Augur metrics for SCC and Kokomo in our metric stack, and it's not necessarily complexity, but we really like lib years as well. Big shout out to lib years, where not just how complex the code is, but how out of date it is definitely another risk factor that we think CHAOSS has a great metric for and have incorporated into our metric site. I'll drop a link.
Yeah, that's a good point. Other thoughts? I'm curious what other people think about code complexity as it relates to viability and risk.
I don't know whether that's measuring anyone, but like the team, the number of people contributing to a project also adds complexity, and we see in pieces of software like you can even identify who has written the software without looking at the blame, just looking at the code itself. And I suppose that is somehow, I don't know, making that more unified or more. It helps to people be adapting that software, people being contributing to that software. So yeah, that could be also a thing.
Remy, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, to that point, once upon a time back in the Python 2 days, there was a project called Get by a Bus, which would do not just like how many contributors, but they would look for unique knowledge. So what are the files within a repository that have been touched by the smallest number of people? So you could find like those bottlenecks of people where there was unique knowledge that could be a risk if you lost a contributor. So that's sort of the, the the other side of the coin for what we were just talking about, not just looking at the complexity of contributors, but like when there is a lack of complexity of contributors, which is also an indicator of risk. And there's a really old Python 2 repo somewhere on GitHub that we wrote back in the day.
And it was called Get by a Bus.
Get by a bus. I love it.
Yeah, we rewrote it in Go. One of our undergrads rewrote it in Go called Get by a Truck, I think. But Get by a Bus was actually a grad student thesis project. I'll dig it up and see if I can find it.
That's really interesting. Thanks. So we've had a couple of new people join. What we're talking about now is thinking about measuring the complexity of projects and how that impacts viability and risk contribution decisions for open source program offices. Another thing that I was kind of thinking about is if you're looking at code complexity or complexity of a project in general, and relating it back to assessing viability and risk, there might be things that you weight differently. For example, there might be some things that your organization cares more about or less about. A smaller, like a really small organization might care about things like complexity of programming language itself. So, a small company that only does stuff in Python, if you're talking about a Java, a very large Java application, that is going to seem a lot more complex to the teams that might be responsible for supporting that, for example. Sorry, I didn't get to the mute in time. Other thoughts?
Another area that I think is a slightly different flavor than just the squashing of container images that I mentioned earlier. But if you have a project that is relying on a lot of different images that are all glued together, having different runtimes in each of those images instead of a standardized runtime, I think creates yet another area of complexity, because now you don't just have to update one runtime and have something a little more simple or automated. You've got to be tracking multiple runtimes and how those interact with the underlying OS.
I mean, anything that isn't containerized is probably going to have to do that, right? And anything that's away from the main, like anything that's at the end of the wire, like this whole Internet of Things, like basically if it's not a major computing center computer, it's probably going to have to be compiled for multiple different CPU architectures. Like we see this all the time with Zephyr, where a big part of what Zephyr does is ensure that it compiles to the 50 different pieces of hardware that it's able to run on. So like in some cases, obviously you can't do anything about that. But in other cases, perhaps runtimes that you don't really need could be set aside, or a project could support specific runtimes more completely if they're important. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I just know that sometimes you can't do anything about that.
Well, there's a difference between necessary runtimes and runtimes just because they came with whatever you grabbed and you just drop it in like a Lego block.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think the
And I
project
think what you said, Sean, is true when you're talking about complexity in a lot of different ways. There's the complexity that you can do something about, and then there's the complexity that
is part of living, I guess. Yeah.
yeah.
I guess when we, so it's not that actually people ask for this, because the technical teams, when they want to just adopt something, they just check that they have their own technical metrics in terms, so they are happy to adopt complex projects if they suit their needs and they have the knowledge in the specific component that maybe they're going to use. So, but this is not really measurable. I guess we would, when they ask us, we try to look, for example, at the licensing, like license coverage, that is in the metrics. So, because sometimes projects have like random, I mean, many files are unlicensed, or many parts of them are, and maybe compatibility with existing projects, etc. So, and libyears, yes, libyears is very interesting. Also, we've been looking at this.
Yeah, I feel like you folks at CERN have sort of the advantage, right? Because you've got a lot of really smart technical people who can handle a lot of complexity that you might not be able to in other organizations. I'm just, as you know, I'm a fangirl of CERN, so I'm just, you know.
Yeah. In some corners, yes, yeah, they have very specific, yes, yeah, knowledge.
This was a great question, Dawn. I mean, it has a lot of different facets to it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I got this question and I was like, well, I don't know. You could do that a lot of different ways, which is why I brought it to this group. And I'll point the person who asked me this question to the recording once we have it available.
And maybe just another thing that we are asked, but sometimes from management lines is who else is using this? I mean, we want to adopt this, but how widely it is used, and how many organizations are. So it's kind of, I don't know, organization diversity or whatever, but more for the operational side than the. So the technical teams are interested also in the contributions and the health of the community and this kind of stuff, but the managers are more interested in who else is using this in prod.
Yeah, and I think adoption is something that's super important. It's hard to get at a lot of times, but knowing that a project is adopted by a bunch of other organizations helps give you some confidence that you know that it's going to continue to be around because lots of people are relying on it, for example. At least that's a theory. Other thoughts on this topic? While you're thinking about that, just remember we do still have time if anybody else has agenda items that they'd like to add to the agenda. We still have some space for that. Okay. Well, I think we've covered quite a bit. We can always talk about this in another meeting too. If somebody comes up with some brilliant ideas for measuring complexity that we haven't covered, I would love to hear those in the future as well. I also wanted to talk about future agenda items. So one of the things that we talked about having as an agenda item is digital sovereignty around, you know, a cyber resiliency act, how open source plays into all of this and how it impacts those of you who are working in open source program offices. So I was chatting with Mirko Bohm, who is unavailable today, and I think he's going to be at the LF events in 2 weeks on the 30th. So I'm gonna ping him again to see if maybe he wants to do this because he's been leading a lot of discussions around the CRA in particular. If anybody else knows somebody who would be a great speaker, don't hesitate to let me know. Maybe somebody who's less busy than Mirko. If not, I'll continue to see if we can get him on the schedule. Are there other items that we would like to have on the agenda, whether it's something that you want to talk about in a future meeting or something that you want me to see if I can find someone to talk to us about, or just general discussion items? Any thoughts? Okay. Feel free to add those to the Slack channel or ping me. I'm happy to, if you think of something that you'd love for us to talk about, I'm happy to chat about that.
One topic I brought up before is the business value. I think that's still going on in parallel. Another thing I come to realize that just last couple of days is the open source. In open source communities, there is a lot of effort to create new open source community standard, right? Whether it's security, safety, a lot of different things. Then there's also like an international standard, for example, ISO standard. Like for example, AI have a ISO 42001, things like that. Then there are also corresponding certification processes. So this could be a topic potentially, is how does the CHAOSS matrix, since there's no like a certification or kind of ISO standard related to this effort, how organization can use the CHAOSS matrix as part of the effort to be compliant?
Yeah, I can tell you that, sorry, I'm just trying to take that so we don't lose that. We have some people who are interested in developing CHAOSS metrics into ISO standards. So Yuhui Wang from Huawei is one of the people who's been kind of driving that effort, along with Daniel Izquierdo from Bitergia. So they're some of the people who've been thinking about this. The reality is it is incredibly challenging to turn things like this into ISO standards. So it's not that we're not interested in doing it. It's that it requires some specialized skills and a lot of time. And so we have people interested in doing it, but so far we haven't made a ton of progress. So yeah, so it'd be really interesting to have a discussion about using CHAOSS metrics when people are trying to be ISO compliant when we don't have a standard for it. So that would
Yeah.
be a good feature
The,
topic.
the discussion regarding this topic is ISO standard is great. It has its own purpose and scope. The thing is, it doesn't cover everything. It typically is not very descriptive because they want to be standard, right? So it cannot go into details. So that created a problem for specific use cases, and for open source, a lot of this standard may not apply. So that now the question for CHAOSS is, can the matrix be, in a way, since it's specialized in, can it be like created in a way that it's really representative of all the like security, safety, etc. Issues that can CHAOSS matrix can be representative of all those relevant domain knowledge. If it is, then even if it's not part of ISO, it will still be very useful as part of the compliance process.
Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting conversation. I've put your name next to it, so maybe we'll chat a little bit more about it offline and see if we can get. Yuhui's hard to get in this meeting because being based in China, this is in the middle of his night. But we might be able to get Daniel or somebody else to come in and chat with us about what we've done so far. So let's see how that goes.
I put a couple comments in chat.
Okay.
Just that I've talked with Shane Coughlin about this, and I think you were actually in the room at OSSEU 2024, Dawn, when I chatted with Shane about this, that, you know, when they've created ISO standards for other LF projects, but it's a very long-term, labor-intensive process. And there was commitment from a number of firms in Japan, and in the case of the ones that Shane shepherded, that provided people and support for that activity. And I think right now, Yuhui and his organization are the only ones with like a commitment of, the necessary commitment of people. And I don't know if that's enough.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, we'll see if we can bring that perspective in when we put it on the agenda for a future item. Reliable reporting tools and how to interpret findings. I'm going to guess that maybe Rashida added this one. If I'm wrong, let me
It
know.
was me. Yeah, I think at the company I work for, we've been working on finding reliable reporting tools because some of the ones we've been evaluating, there's a lot of false positives, and that can skew like how vulnerable an open source project actually is. Like if it's finding things or vulnerabilities that are just in the test and not in the source or the build. So I think that would be an interesting discussion to have. And yeah, I added that comment on one of the guides I was reviewing.
Yeah, thanks for that, by the way. I saw that comment, and I kind of, yeah, I thought about it for this group because I think it would be a good a good discussion to have, because what we can do is we can just have people talk about the tools that they use within their OSPO and what's worked and what hasn't. Because I know that, you know, a lot of people have been working in these OSPOs for quite a while, and they've tried lots of different things, and it would be great to get some learnings from that. So that would be super helpful.
Definitely, and that could be a future practitioner guide to add into the CHAOSS queue.
Yeah, for sure. If someone wants to write it, let me know. All right. Anything else? Okay, just a couple of reminders. It is not too late to register to go to the Digital Resilience Forum in Madrid on October 29th or OSPOlogy Lyon. Both of those are coming right up. They're both free to attend. And I think that they're both going to be really interesting, looking at the agendas, which you can get from the links there. So I think those are going to be fun. So if you're in the European area and you want to drop by, feel free to go ahead and register for those. There are also a couple of CFPs closing soon. So Scale, if you haven't been, is a really interesting event in Pasadena. It has a lot of open source enthusiasts combined with a lot of people who work at open source program offices. They have a kids track, so it's over a weekend. People bring their kids, and there's a track that's presented by and for people under the age of 18. They have separate social activities, so the kids are in an area with no alcohol, and there's games and things for kids to do, and then there's, you know, other stuff for adults to do. So it's a really interesting, fun event. So if you have kids and want to get them involved in open source, that's a really great way to do it. I don't have kids, but I still love this event. It's just a fantastic event. FOSS Backstage is kind of interesting. So it's, I think, really aligned with what we do in OSPOs. So FOSS Backstage is really, it's called Backstage because it's kind of like all of the stuff that happens around the projects that's not code. So they have tracks on design, they talk about compliance, there's talks about community. So there's, you know, it's kind of all of the things around open source outside of the code. So it's a really interesting event, and they do a really nice job with it. But both of those CFPs close very soon, so in the next couple of weeks. Okay, so we have run out of things that I wanted to talk about, which is good because I'm over my cold, but my voice is starting to give out. So I don't know how much longer I can talk. So I think we're done. Thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. It's been great seeing everybody.
All right, see you guys.
Bye everybody.
Bye.